After not being on the calendar for the 2020 season as planned, the Dutch Grand Prix returned to Formula 1 after 36 years away, on a freshly improved track designed to accommodate the more modern and faster cars, while at the same time allowing Liberty Media to go cha-ching on Max Mania. Now unfortunately the race itself was a bit of a snooze fest, so me being asleep on my sofa dealing with long COVID wasn't necessarily a bad thing. And while yes, some moves did get made throughout the race, like Alonso on the final lap and Checo making his way from the back of the field, well, a pit lane start, people talked more about the sheer insanity of the Dutch crowd than they did about the actual race. That is, if you could see anything through that plume of orange smoke. So what did they do to get Zandvoort back on the calendar? Well, besides resurfacing and improving the pit facilities to bring it to FIA Grade 1 standards, they also added banking to some of the corners to allow the cars to follow closer, because Formula 1 cars in dirty air these days aren't exactly able to follow. The result is a layout that is a far cry from what was seen in the olden days, as the newer track built in 1999 is a lot more compact than what we used to see in F1's so-called golden era, with drivers like Jim Clark, Jackie Ickx and Lorenzo Bandini racing on that same track. The previous layout was fast, sweeping and dangerous, and it's at this track that Jackie Oliver hit Jackie Ickx's car and the latter burst into flames. And it was also the scene of the infamous Roger Williamson crash where David Purley stopped his car and got out to help, but because the track was so ill prepared in terms of fire marshalling and fire extinguishers, everybody just stood there and watched as Williamson burned to death in his car and Purley helplessly tried to get him out. And while what is now the Red Bull Ring became shorter than the old Österreich Ring, it is still a very fast track. The Red Bull Ring, that is. Zandvoort, meanwhile, went from being a fast, sweeping track to a tight and technical one, and development around the local area in the meantime means that there is no chance of the longer circuit ever coming back. And with the nature reserve to the north, what's left has very little wiggle room for expansion. So what you're left with is a modern facility, but with still that old school feel. You're left with a hybrid between Monaco and the Hungaroring, two tracks on the F1 calendar that are notoriously difficult to overtake at, and the Hungaroring is often called Monaco with trees. This then is Monaco with sand, and Zandvoort actually translates to the English Sandford. Hot fuzz vibes. But despite the changes, the old track and the new track are roughly the same length. It shrunk from 2.626 miles to 2.426 miles. And the drivers loved every second of driving on it, saying that it was a challenge and a thrill to drive, and also saying that it's what they want from circuits. It also has very little room for error, as most of the corners have gravel or just walls on the outside, like the tracks of old used to, and we're not left with 3 million acres of tarmac runoff that we see everywhere else. But while the drivers loved driving it, they all said that racing would be quite tricky, if not boring. The track is also narrow, and while F1 has minimum width requirements, that's only for new tracks, so tracks that already exist, such as Canada and Zandvoort, are exempt from that rule. It comes across as one of those tracks where it's fun to drive on the limit for drivers in real life, in qualifying and things like that, and good for hot lapping at a sim racing / esports level, but when you actually have to try and race and get past the guy in front, it then becomes a processional chore. And in esports and sim racing, it's probably my most successful track. I've won there twice, and one of those wins I never mention whatsoever. And all this stuff about not being able to race I've covered before, and others have talked about it at length elsewhere on the internet. Big cars are bad cars, long cars are bad cars, topside aero dependent cars are bad cars, heavy cars are bad cars, and so on and so forth. When Mercedes has an F1 car that's longer than the road-going S-Class and wider at the same time, then you know you're going to have issues on tight and twisty tracks such as Zandvoort and Monaco, so while we might be saying that it's a problem based around the cars, it will actually be interesting to see what happens with the new 2022 ground effect style cars, and while they might be slightly shorter, they'll be heavier at the same time, so that might cause issues with outbraking moves into turn 1 for instance. But, like I've said in other videos, some might argue that it should be the quality of the overtaking as opposed to the quantity of the overtaking, but when you can't get close enough already, even with a magic flap on the rear of your car, you know you're going to be consigned to being stuck behind the guy ahead unless he makes a mistake or has a bad pit stop. So as a racetrack that will provide a great racing arena, it's hard to say whether it's a problem with the track or the cars, or both. Would the smaller cars of the early 2000s have had a better time out there? And that's hard to say. Some of you might say yes, some of you might say no, and I'd like to hear your opinions in the comment section. Is it too early to say get this off the calendar, or just wait for 2022 and then make a decision? Or should Zandvoort just exclusively be used for lower category Formula racing and the odd GT TCR event? But what you can't deny though is that as a commercial exercise the place was rammed and they went mental every single time the Red Bull driven by their home hero went by. It makes you wonder, had Kubica not had his accident, if F1 would be racing in Poland now with the same sort of manic atmosphere. But yeah, that's my thoughts. Anyway, there wasn't really much of a race to review this weekend, so I thought I'd look at whether or not it's actually a good idea to bring the circuit back, or if it was just a way of cashing in on the new interest in F1 in the Netherlands. But like I say, leave all your thoughts down in the comments and get a discussion going, because it is, after all, why I do Pressing Issues. And while scrolling down to the comments, if you like the video, click the thumbs up thing, and if you want to watch more of what I do here, then get the subscribe button tapped and get that bell on as well so you never miss a future video. Massive thanks, as always, go out to the good folk at Patreon for their continued support, and if you want to join them at supporting me at a more personal level, or just joining the Discord chatter, then all relevant links will be down in the description box for you. So until next time, I've been Millward. Have a great day wherever you live in the world, and I'll see you all again soon for another video. So until then, goodbye.